your founder and support here at Healthy Relationships Sisterhood. Thanks so much for being here. And of course, we're all here to support each other. And I'm so happy about that. I love the community we've been forming here. And if you are getting onto the call, say hello, tell me where you're from. It's always cool to see where different people are joining from. And I happen to be joining from Costa Rica right now. I'm still here. And so that's why, my background's a little different, the lighting's a little different, things like that. So hopefully you are hearing me, and do give me a thumbs up if you can see me or not hear me or anything like that, so I can do my best to adjust things. I'm doing a little adjusting now, noticing it's not looking like I thought it was. Okay, so we are here to discuss trauma, and specifically complex trauma, and how that can impact your relationships. And I know that this is a big topic, so I'm going to keep it as concise as I can and kind of overarching. And then, feel free to ask questions, and we can always go deeper another time. But this trauma that I'm speaking to is called complex or developmental trauma. And developmental trauma is trauma that occurs while you're developing, especially in your first 5 years of life. And complex trauma is any kind of trauma that can be either developmental trauma or trauma that occurs like chronically. So versus what we call shock trauma, which is trauma that occurs like a one-time event. Say you were in a holdup, or you were in a car accident, or a rape, or something like that, an attack. So those would be shock trauma events. Or you were bitten by a dog, or anything like that, a fall. Even somebody dying could be more of a shock trauma event. So that's not what I'm speaking to here tonight. What I'm speaking to tonight is complex trauma and or developmental trauma. So these types of traumas, there are multiple ways you can have complex or early trauma, or also sometimes called relational trauma, in your life, and pretty much nobody escapes childhood without it. So we all have varying degrees, different things have happened in our lives, and they all have an impact, especially on our relationships when they were relational types of trauma. So if something happened in your relationship, maybe you were bullied by your older brother, maybe your mother was neglectful or an alcoholic, maybe your parents were fighting all the time, or stuff that happened even while you were in the womb. I've spoken to some of this before, but I want to lay out not so much all the types of trauma, we'll look at a little bit more, but also how they impact you now in your relationships, because we don't always make that connection between our early life situations and what's happening now. A lot, or you had a bad breakup, that's not necessarily traumatic. It may have been really challenging, it may be really difficult and frustrating, but I don't necessarily consider it a trauma. Accidental, unintentional, like your mother got sick while you were in the womb and she had to go to the hospital, or maybe she was grieving, maybe her mother died while you were in the womb, and so she was grieving, and so she was like disconnected from you emotionally. Or maybe your parents were fighting while you were in the womb, or maybe you were sick in the womb and you had to have like in vitro surgery or something, or treatment of some sort. Or maybe when you were born you were ill and needed to be in the hospital for a while, and there was a lot of separation and a lack of ability to bond with your mother or your caregivers. So there's a lot of early life events that happen that are totally unpreventable, right, and non-intentional, they're accidental. Or maybe you grew up in a war zone, or maybe in severe poverty, you were malnourished. All these would be traumatic to your growing nervous system, your growing brain and emotional system. And of course, there's straight out abuse, whether it was physical or emotional, that could have happened, or various types of neglect, emotional neglect, physical neglect. Maybe you didn't get changed enough. Maybe you didn't get fed enough. Maybe your mother was just always busy and didn't give you the emotional attention you needed, or father. So there's these different kinds of neglect that could have happened. Maybe they just left you like for long periods of time, right, and left you with a relative. Or maybe you were put up for adoption or in foster care, or went from foster care home to care home, and or maybe you stayed in an adoption center. Could have happened. Maybe a sibling was, or maybe a sibling was a bully to you, like I said earlier, or maybe a cousin was, or maybe, of course, you could have been sexually um, molested by somebody. So there's, again, I can go on and on. There's so many things that can happen to us early in life um, by maltreatment, or just sort of accidents and unpreventable situations. So, and of course, if you're here and watching, feel free to contribute, because everybody has a story, and all of our stories are valid. So, maybe um, if a parent was in jail, that's another thing, that parent was unavailable, or maybe you had several stepfathers or something coming in and out of your life. Maybe you were shipped from one parent to another, to a cousin, to a grandmother. Maybe you had a lack of consistency, or maybe your family moved all the time, so you didn't get like a stable home, even though you were with your family unit. So there's some more examples. So we tend to think now, in our current adult lives and in our current adult relationships, that there's something that we're doing wrong, that we're not communicating properly. I hear that a lot from my clients. I don't know how to communicate, so that's why I'm having all these issues in my relationships. Or maybe I don't love myself, so that's why I can't love somebody else. I often hear that. Maybe I'm codependent, and so that's why I don't know how to have healthy relationships, because I'm always trying to take care of everybody. So these, for sure, I would agree, can be problematic. And there's so many more unhealthy boundaries. People are very aware of boundaries these days and often claim they set them, or they don't like when other people set boundaries for them. So I'm going to that I'm listing can be the result of certain kinds of developmental or complex trauma. That your inability to communicate clearly, or that your inability to love yourself, that your inability to speak up for yourself, to set boundaries, to ask for what you want. If you find yourself often blaming and criticizing either yourself or your loved ones, if you often feel powerless, helpless, depressed, lonely, if you feel you don't know how to step up to responsibility, and you like to kind of put it onto others or avoid taking responsibility, that can be another can be a result of early trauma. If you find yourself say, sort of spacing out a lot, disconnecting, dissociating, those can be results of trauma also. There can be a difficulty with staying connected, staying present, connected to yourself and connected to others. And that can be the result of very early trauma from the womb to the first 6 months of life. There can be this, like I said earlier, so I'm going to go through a sort of a sequence in my mind based on the training and trauma that I've had. If you are someone who doesn't really know what you need and want, but you pay a lot of attention to what others need and want, you're constantly attending to others, trying to take care of them, it's a sign of codependency. Sort of bending over backwards for people, hoping for praise and acknowledgement for that, but then avoiding and or denying your own needs and desires, feeling like you don't have any needs or it's bad to have needs. That can be a result of a certain kind of trauma in the first, I believe, 2 to 3 years of life, or I'm going to say 1 to 2 years of life actually. And then there's another kind of trauma where you don't trust very much, where you feel you have to, kind of hide who you truly are, and then show yourself a certain way so that you'll be liked. Raise your hand if that's familiar to you. If you find yourself wanting to be more authentic, but really afraid that if you are, people won't like you. That's a different kind of trauma. And you can have more than one. Most of us can relate to more than one of these types of issues. But that's another kind of trauma, when you kind of pretend to be someone that you're not, pretend to be really nice in order to get liked, say yes a lot when you want to say no. So there's boundary issues there. Try to please. That's again related to codependency. It can be based on early types of trauma where you didn't get your needs met, and so you felt like it was safer to try to meet other people's needs because it was too threatening or scary or painful to not have your needs met. So that's what can happen to an infant or baby if they're getting neglected or getting shamed for their own needs. They'll kind of cut off their connection to their own needs and then look to how they can get the right attention that they need by being a giver, by being a caretaker, by being needless, because being needy was too painful. And then the pleaser is a little different, as someone who likes to say yes, like I was saying, who is not completely authentic, holds back part of their truth for fear of not being liked. So that could be somebody who maybe was shamed as a child, who was punished a lot, whose parents were more authoritarian, very strict, or shaming or punishing. And so you learned that just to be your natural, authentic self got you bad attention. So you learn to then just kind of shut down part of your authenticity in order to get good attention. So maybe you then would work really hard to get the good grades, or try and be a good athlete or something, so that you could get good attention, even though maybe what you really wanted to do was just play in the pool or run around the block or sleep in or whatever. So you cut off part of your authenticity in order to get praise and what feels like love, even though in a way it's kind of conditional love. I know I'm going quickly here, so feel free to rewind. These videos will stay up for a little while and you can come back and listen again. If you are someone who has a lot of addictions, maybe a food addiction or an alcohol or a drug or some kind of substance abuse that you're dealing with, know that this is pretty hard not to be rooted in developmental or complex trauma, because we go to substances for comfort and for coping when our emotions are too much. So if you had a lot of big emotions that weren't met, if you had needs that weren't met, if your emotions were overwhelming to you because there was so much pain or anger or sadness when you were growing up, then it makes perfect sense that your survival strategy would be to numb yourself, because your little baby and little person nervous system couldn't handle all this big energy that wanted to come through. And it may not have been safe for you to feel your emotions. You may have been punished for feeling or expressing emotions. So you may have learned to kind of shut them down. And then, emotions are energy, and they actually need to move through for us to be healthy and for us to feel flow in our lives. So in order for you to cope with all that energy inside, that contained and kind of trapped energy, you may have turned to substances to numb yourself, or to kind of zone out and become, and kind of change your state, so you didn't have to feel all this stuff that wanted to come up. So even cigarettes, of course, are especially addicting. Many of you may know nicotine is more addictive than even PCP. So it's incredibly addictive, and of course it has a soothing effect for many people, or stimulating. But that can be another coping mechanism, another way to numb or to kind of work with nervous energy, right? Because you've got something to do with your hands. So picking the hair, picking the nails, the skin. There's so many addictive habits. The cutting, is a way to deal with intense energy that was too much for your system to handle. So I urge you to get support, to get help around these types of issues, especially if you're you're hurting yourself. You're smoking and it's bad for you, but you can't stop. You're drinking and it's bad for you and you can't stop. Or you stop and then you start again. You need help. And that's why I was saying to someone recently, 12-step programs are really effective. They're super duper effective at helping people get through these addictions and feel that you're not alone, because it's really lonely to have an addiction, and then you can be really hard on yourself for doing that. And it's just know that it's simply a coping mechanism, and we all have had various coping mechanisms. Some of them are more hurtful to ourselves or others than other mechanisms. But if you're hooked on something and feel like you have an addiction and a habit, a bad habit, I really urge you to get some support with that. And the 12-step groups are great because they're groups and you feel connected, and your shame diminishes, because there's this huge shame component when you have an addiction. I'm not an addiction specialist, but I've certainly helped people through some stuff, and especially the inner work of working with your emotions is really important. So health issues, if you have a lot of health issues, if you had a lot of digestive issues or immune system issues, these can be signs of early trauma that wasn't processed, or emotions that were held within the body and not worked through. So if you're chronically ill, again, please seek some support, because that really can shift as you, of course, work with your health, but also work with your nervous system and your early life traumas that are kind of keeping you in a holding pattern. If you have a habit of being overly responsible, if you, I actually kind of already mentioned that when I was talking about the caretaker and the overgiver, right? If you happen to be incredibly indecisive, you get really stuck, or you procrastinate a ton, this can be related to that type of trauma, again, that's related to kind of shutting down your authenticity in order to please, in order to not disappoint people. So just hoping this is helpful, that I named some really common habitual patterns that a lot of us have that we may not have connected is actually rooted in early traumas, and that we can actually unwind through getting support from somebody, especially who knows how to work with developmental and complex trauma. So self-sabotage, right? If you start to succeed and then you find a way to cut yourself down, you find a way to mess yourself up, to fail in a certain way, to disappoint people, to fall back. Look, that's another one that seems sort of benign in a way, but it really can be rooted in your own sort of lack of self-worth. And also, I'm just going to put this out there, it's a bigger topic that I won't go into a lot right now, but your fear of losing your connection to an attachment figure, like a parental or caregiver figure. There's ways that if we connect it's hard to explain in a nutshell, but if we connect our self-worth and our value to our connection to a caregiver, I don't think I'm saying this right at the moment, but I'll come back and redo it if I need to. In any case, if we connect we all connect to a caregiver, right? And to, like, we get so much because we're so dependent on our first caregivers. But there's a way that we all have this attachment, and some of us have a healthy and others have a not so healthy form of attachment to those caregivers. But if your attachment wasn't so healthy, and you still feel this like need to prove yourself or to stay connected to that attachment figure because you're not enough rooted in your own self-worth and self-esteem, then you're going to keep self-sabotaging, because it somehow on a real deep level feels like that's going to help you stay connected to that attachment figure. That's a big concept. super super unconscious. That pattern would be super unconscious, but I just want to plant a seed for that to start to be understood here. So I've spoken about a lot of issues, and I'm going to name one more, which is just an overall general anxiety. Raise your hand if you tend to feel anxiety, right? Most people can't get away without having anxiety, and we may have it at periods in our lives, right? When there's a lot going on, we have extra pressure on ourselves or responsibility, or like times of strife like a lot of us have had in 2020. But if you suffer from a lot of anxiety, again, that can be rooted in early trauma, in not getting your needs met and feeling like you're going to disappoint people and putting a lot of pressure on yourself, in feeling like you're going to lose your attachment relationship. All of that can manifest in anxiety now in your life. So let me know if you're watching later. Please chime in and say where you're from, and let me know if you have any questions. I love hearing from you. I will always come back and connect with you and answer your questions. I think what's happening is there may be some and I'm not seeing them because I'm getting some notifications, but they're not actually showing up right here on the video. So my apologies if you are here and I'm just missing your comments. But that's the gist of what I wanted to share. I just wanted to give you a basic sense of how much early trauma is sort of the underpinning or the core cause of so much of the dysfunction that we experience in our adult lives. And that's why, for me as a relationship coach, when I got trained 8 or 9 years ago now, I realized after my training I needed to know more. I wanted to know more because I was hearing so much about trauma, and I realized I wanted to go deeper. And so ever since then, I've been studying developmental and complex trauma, and I've continued my training because they just keep offering more advanced trainings, and I'm continuing to study because I'm fascinated by it, basically, and I know that it's helping my clients the more I understand trauma. So great, Jennifer, thanks for being here, and you're very welcome. Let me know if you have any questions. And anyone else, if you're here, let me know. It's weird that for some reason Facebook used to give me let me see how many people are watching, and now I can't see that even though I know there's people here. Hey, Deborah, great to see you. Trauma is so powerful. Thank you for being here, and you're welcome for sharing with you. So yes, if you have questions, let me know. And I'm going to put in a link for my one-on-one, what I call relationship breakthrough session. So if you are struggling in relationships, if you keep finding yourself in dysfunctional patterns and you can't seem to get out, maybe you've even done therapy. I work with a lot of people who've been through therapy and didn't get what they needed there, so they come to me and they get results. I do have a little space in my schedule for private clients right now, and as well starting in February, and I will be opening up a group so more people, I can support more women in a relationship group I call Rock Your Relationship. So I'll open up a couple one-on-one times in my schedule, and then sign up if you'd like some support in looking at how you're stuck and how I like to give a takeaway or like a mini plan for how you can get yourself unstuck in your relationship. So that's what the relationship breakthrough session is for. And then if it seems like a good fit to work together, we can talk about that. There's absolutely no pressure to do that. And we can look at the different options that I have available. So I'm going to pop that in there right now. And if you don't see a time, actually there are no times there. I'm going to open a couple times up when I get off the call. But if you're popping in within after 10 minutes or so, when I finish the video, there should be at least a couple slots unless they were taken. So if you definitely want to get in a time and you don't see any, just message me or comment here in the on the comment section and let me know you couldn't find a slot or you couldn't find one that works, and we'll figure it out. All right, everybody, I hope this has been helpful. Happy to be here and support you. And heads up that next week, so I'm still in Costa Rica and I'm taking next week off. So I'm going to take a break from our lives just for 1 week next week, and then I'll be back in February. So go ahead and leave a comment and let me know your big takeaway from tonight if you had one. I'd love to hear what you're learning and also any questions, and I hope to see you 2 weeks from now, the first Thursday of February, for our next Facebook Live training. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye for now.